The morning air felt crisp against Maya's face as she walked through the iron gates of Pine Hill Cemetery. This had become her ritual over the past 3 months, walking among the quiet tombstones as the sun rose, finding an odd sort of peace in a place most people avoided. Maya pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders and adjusted the strap of her bag. At 32, she hadn't expected to be spending her mornings in a cemetery, but grief had changed her in ways she never anticipated. Since her mother's passing, sleep came in broken fragments, leaving her awake before dawn with nowhere to go but her thoughts. The cemetery, with its winding paths and ancient trees, had become her unexpected sanctuary. Here, among strangers who could no longer judge, she felt free to remember, to cry, to simply breathe without the weight of other people's expectations of how she should be, moving on. "Morning," she whispered to an elderly groundskeeper who nodded as he raked fallen leaves. He never asked why a young woman visited so regularly, and she appreciated his quiet understanding. Maya followed her usual path, past the ornate family plots with their stone angels and marble benches, toward the eastern corner where her mother rested beneath a simple headstone. But today, something drew her attention to a different section, a part of the cemetery she rarely visited. A shaft of sunlight broke through the trees, illuminating a row of newer graves. One tombstone, plainer than the others, seemed to catch the light differently. Maya found herself drifting toward it, her feet crunching on the gravel path as she veered from her usual route. The stone was modest gray granite, unpolished and slightly tilted in the soil as if it had been placed with haste rather than care. Unlike the neighboring graves with their fresh flowers and trinkets, this one stood bare except for a thin layer of fallen leaves and dirt splashed up from recent rain. Maya knelt down to read the simple inscription, "Thomas Winters, 1953-2018. No beloved father or cherished husband. No meaningful quote. Just a name and the years that bookended a life she knew nothing about." "Who were you?" Maya whispered, brushing away a leaf that had settled against the stone. 4 years had passed since this Thomas Winters had died, yet his grave showed no signs of visitors. No weathered stuffed animals or faded plastic flowers. Not even a pebble placed in remembrance. She sat back on her heels, suddenly aware of how strange it might look, a woman crouching before the grave of someone she didn't know. But the cemetery was empty except for the distant figure of the groundskeeper. And something about this forgotten stone kept her rooted to the spot. Maya opened her bag and pulled out the small notebook she always carried. She had started journaling after her therapist suggested it might help process her grief. Most mornings she would sit by her mother's grave and write letters she could never send, pouring out her thoughts about the unfairness of losing her only family at just 58. But today, staring at Thomas Winters' neglected headstone, she turned to a fresh page. Her pen hovered uncertainly before touching the paper. "Dear Mr. Winters," she wrote, the words forming before she could question them. "I don't know you. I was visiting my mom when I noticed your grave looking lonely." Maya paused, wondering why she felt compelled to write to a stranger. Perhaps it was the starkness of his tombstone, or maybe she recognized something in the absence of visitors that echoed her own fears of being forgotten. "I wonder if you have family who live far away, or if maybe you outlived everyone who loved you. That's a hard thought, isn't it? Being the last one left." The words flowed more easily now as Maya settled against a nearby tree, her notebook balanced on her knees. "My mom died 3 months ago. Cancer. It was quick in the end, which the doctor said was a blessing. I'm not sure I agree. I wasn't ready to say goodbye, but then, I don't think I ever would have been." A jogger passed on the main path, and Maya waited until they disappeared around the bend before continuing. "Sometimes I wonder what she would think of me now. Spending my mornings talking to graves instead of living people." She was always so social, the type who knew everyone at the grocery store. "I got my quietness from my dad, I think, though I barely remember him." Maya's pen moved quickly now, the words tumbling out as if she'd opened a dam. She wrote about her job at the library, surrounded by books but feeling disconnected from their stories lately. She described her apartment with its plant-filled windowsills, all cuttings from her mother's garden that she was desperately trying to keep alive. "I had a dream about her last night," Maya wrote, her handwriting growing less careful. "We were in her kitchen and she was teaching me to make her famous apple pie. But when I looked down at the apples I was slicing, they turned to photographs, old pictures of us that scattered across the floor. When When I looked up, she was gone, and I was alone in an empty house. A tear splashed onto the page, blurring the ink. Maya wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand and took a deep breath. Sorry for dumping all this on you, Mr. Winters. Maybe it's easier talking to someone who can't interrupt or offer well-meaning advice. Everyone keeps telling me it gets easier, but they don't say when or how. Does it just happen one morning? Do you wake up and suddenly remember how to live without feeling like you're missing a limb? The cemetery had grown quieter, the early morning stillness giving way to the distant sounds of the town waking up. Maya checked her watch. She would need to leave soon to open the library. Anyway, I hope wherever you are is peaceful, and I hope someone remembers you with love even if they can't visit. She signed simply, Maya, and then sat looking at the filled page. What had started as a strange impulse now left her feeling oddly lighter, as if she had shared her burden with someone who truly couldn't judge. On impulse, Maya carefully tore the page from her notebook and folded it into thirds. She hesitated, then opened her bag again and pulled out an envelope she'd been using as a bookmark. She slipped the letter inside and sealed it, writing Thomas Winters on the front. Looking around to make sure no one was watching, Maya dug a small hole at the base of the tombstone with her fingers, pushing aside pebbles and softened earth until she had made a space deep enough that the wind wouldn't uncover her letter. She placed the envelope inside and covered it carefully, patting the dirt back into place. This is probably crossing some line of cemetery etiquette, she murmured, brushing the soil from her hands, but it felt right somehow. Maya stood and brushed off her jeans, suddenly feeling foolish. Had grief finally pushed her over some edge of reasonable behavior? Leaving letters for dead strangers wasn't exactly a sign of healthy coping. I should probably mention this to Dr. Reeves, she said to herself, thinking of her next therapy appointment. As she turned to leave, a gust of wind swept through the cemetery, sending leaves skittering across the ground. One small red leaf detached from a nearby maple and landed directly on top of where she had buried her letter. Maya smiled slightly at the coincidence. Goodbye, Mr. Winters, she said softly. Maybe I'll see you again. She followed the path back toward the entrance, stopping briefly at her mother's grave to place a smooth stone she had found by Thomas's headstone. Made a new friend today, Mom, she whispered. Or at least I wrote to someone new. Baby steps, right? The morning sun had fully risen now, turning the dew on the grass into a carpet of diamonds. As Maya walked through the cemetery gates, she felt the weight in her chest shift slightly. For the first time in months, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow's dawn walk, curious whether the mysterious Thomas Winters would somehow feel less like a stranger. She didn't expect an answer to her letter, of course. That would be impossible. But as she headed toward the library, Maya couldn't help but wonder about the life condensed into those 2 dates on the tombstone. And why? Of all the graves she passed each morning, this one had called to her today. What she couldn't know, as she glanced back one last time at the cemetery gates, was that her impulsive act would set in motion events that would change her life in ways she could never imagine. For the next week, Maya tried to forget about the letter she'd left at Thomas Winters' grave. During her morning shifts at the library, she found herself distracted, wondering if anyone had found her note. Had a groundskeeper discovered it and thrown it away? The thought bothered her more than it should have. You seem a million miles away today, said Deb, her co-worker at the checkout desk. The older woman peered at Maya over her reading glasses. Everything okay? Maya nodded, forcing a smile as she stamped the due date in a cookbook. Just didn't sleep well, she said, which wasn't entirely a lie. Her dreams had been filled with faceless strangers and letters carried away by the wind. Well, don't let Mrs. Chen catch you daydreaming. She's on the warpath about those missing reference books again. Maya sighed. The head librarian had been increasingly tense since budget cuts were announced. Everyone walked on eggshells these days, afraid their position might be next on the chopping block. By Friday, Maya had convinced herself that leaving the letter had been a silly impulse, one best forgotten. She almost skipped her morning cemetery walk, tempted to try a new coffee shop instead, but habit won out. The familiar iron gates creaked as she pushed them open just as dawn broke. The cemetery looked different today. A heavy rain had fallen overnight, washing everything clean. Puddles reflected the pink-tinged clouds, and the smell of wet earth and grass hung in the air. Maya followed her usual path, nodding to the groundskeeper who was emptying trash bins near the entrance. She visited her mother's grave first, placing a small smooth stone on top of the headstone as she always did. "Morning, Mom," she whispered, adjusting a wind-blown pine cone that had landed nearby. "Library's cutting hours again. Deb thinks they'll start laying people off soon." She paused, still finding it strange to speak aloud to a slab of granite. "I should probably update my resume, but it feels like giving up somehow." After a few quiet moments, Maya glanced toward the section where Thomas Winters lay. She hadn't planned to visit his grave again, but curiosity tugged at her. Just a quick look, she told herself, to see if her letter was still there. She walked slowly through the damp grass, morning dew soaking the hem of her jeans. As she approached Thomas's grave, she stopped short, her breath catching in her throat. The previously neglected tombstone had been cleaned. The rain had helped, but someone had clearly wiped away the dirt and grime that had dulled the granite. And there, placed carefully at the base of the stone, was a small bunch of wildflowers, not store-bought, but hand-picked, purple coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, and sprigs of Queen Anne's lace tied with a piece of blue yarn. Next to the flowers sat a small cream-colored envelope. Maya looked around, half expecting to see someone watching her, but the cemetery remained empty except for birds hopping between puddles. With trembling fingers, she picked up the envelope. Her name was written on the front in neat, slanted handwriting. "This isn't possible," she whispered, turning the envelope over. It was sealed with a drop of wax, an old-fashioned touch that made her stomach tighten with a mixture of curiosity and unease. She carefully broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper, thick and expensive feeling. The handwriting matched that on the envelope, flowing across the page in blue ink. "Dear Maya," it began, "you might find it strange to receive a reply to a letter you left at my father's grave. I'm Claire, Thomas Winters' daughter. I live out of state and don't get to visit Dad's grave as often as I'd like. I was in town for a business trip and came early this morning to leave flowers." Maya sat down heavily on the damp ground, heedless of the moisture seeping through her jeans. Someone had found her letter after all. Imagine my surprise when I dug a little around his headstone, looking for a good spot to place a small memento, and found your envelope. I hope you don't mind that I read it. Your words touched me deeply. Dad didn't have many friends toward the end. He was a private person who kept to himself after Mom died. I tried to convince him to move closer to me in Colorado, but he refused to leave the house where he'd lived for 40 years. By the time he passed, most people had forgotten him. Sometimes I wonder if anyone besides me remembers he existed at all. And then I found your letter, a stranger who noticed his neglected grave and took the time to leave a few kind words. I can't tell you what that meant to me. You wrote about your mother, and I'm truly sorry for your loss. 3 months is still so fresh. Dad's been gone 4 years now, and some days the grief still catches me off guard. Last week I found an old voicemail from him on a backup drive. Just him asking if I'd received a package he sent. And I sat in my car crying for 20 minutes before I could drive to work. Does it get easier? Yes and no. The pain becomes less sharp, more like a dull ache you carry around. Some days you'll forget it's there, and then something small, a song, a smell, a particular shade of blue, will bring it all rushing back, but you learn to live alongside it rather than being consumed by it. I don't mean to lecture. Grief is different for everyone. But I wanted you to know that someone read your words and felt less alone because of them. Dad would have liked you, I think. He was a writer, though he never published anything. He believed in connections between strangers, the invisible threads that link us all together in ways we don't understand. I'll be in town until Sunday for business. If you'd like to get coffee sometime, I've written my number below. If not, that's completely fine too. Either way, thank you for seeing him when so many others had forgotten. Wishing you peace, Claire Winters. Maya read the letter twice more, running her finger over the carefully formed words. A business card was paper-clipped to the bottom of the page. Claire Winters, Regional Director, Apogee Publishing. She looked at the cleaned headstone and the wildflowers nodding in the breeze. Thomas Winters wasn't just a name and dates anymore. He was a private man who had lost his wife, who wrote stories he never shared with the world, who had a daughter who brought him wildflowers even after he was gone. Maya pulled out her phone and checked the time. She had an hour before her shift started, enough time to send a text. She carefully entered the number from the business card. Hi Claire, this is Maya from the cemetery. That sounds like the opening of a horror movie, sorry. Thank you for your letter. I'd love to get coffee if you're free tomorrow. The bean counter on Oak Street is nice and quiet on Saturday mornings. Her thumb hovered over the send button. Was this crazy? Meeting a stranger because of a letter left on a grave? But something about Claire's words resonated with her. The understanding about grief. The mention of invisible threads connecting people. Maya hit send before she could change her mind. The reply came as she was walking through the cemetery gates, her phone buzzing in her pocket. Maya from the cemetery. Best opening line I've had all year. Coffee sounds perfect. The bean counter at 10? And thank you again for your letter. Dad always said chance encounters were the universe's way of keeping us on our toes. Maya smiled, tucking her phone away as she headed toward the library. For the first time in months, she felt a flutter of something like anticipation in her chest. She looked back at the cemetery one last time before turning the corner. Thanks, Mr. Winters, she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was thanking him for his daughter's kind words or for being the unlikely connection between two strangers. Either way, as she walked to work with the morning sun warming her face, Maya felt as if something had shifted, as if a door that had been firmly closed since her mother's death had opened just a crack, letting in a sliver of light and possibility. What that possibility might lead to, she couldn't begin to guess. But for the first time in 3 months, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow with something other than dread. Maya arrived at the bean counter 20 minutes early, her nerves getting the better of her. The small cafe was tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop, its large windows steamed up from the espresso machine working overtime on a Saturday morning. She chose a corner table with a view of the door and ordered a chai latte, watching each person who entered with growing anticipation. What did Claire Winters look like? Maya had pictured someone older, perhaps in her 50s with graying hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. Thomas Winters had died at 65, so his daughter could be any age, really. Maya smoothed her hair and wished she'd worn something nicer than her usual weekend outfit of jeans and a faded blue sweater. She'd almost canceled twice since yesterday. Once at midnight when she lay awake wondering if meeting a stranger from a cemetery was the beginning of a true crime podcast, and again this morning when she tried and failed 3 times to apply eyeliner. The bell above the door jingled, and a woman stepped inside, unwinding a colorful scarf from her neck. She was younger than Maya had imagined, probably in her early 40s with dark hair cut in a practical bob and warm brown eyes that crinkled as she scanned the cafe. She wore a tailored blazer over jeans, looking both professional and approachable. Their eyes met, and the woman smiled with recognition, heading directly to Maya's table. "Maya?" she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Claire. It's nice to meet you in person." Maya stood awkwardly, nearly knocking over her chai. "Yes, hi. It's nice to meet you too." They shook hands, and Maya gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Please sit. Can I get you something to drink?" "I'll grab a coffee in a minute," Claire said, settling into the chair and placing her bag beside her. "I wanted to thank you again for your letter. It was unexpected, but really meaningful." Maya felt her cheeks warm. "I'm still not sure what came over me that day." "I've never done anything like that before," Claire smiled. Dad would say it was a moment of genuine human connection. He was big on those. She glanced around the cafe. "This is a lovely spot. Have you been coming here long?" "Since I moved to town about 5 years ago," Maya said, relaxing slightly as the conversation moved to safer ground. "I work at the public library just down the street. The bean counter has better coffee than our break room." "You're a librarian?" Dad would have loved that. He was a voracious reader. Claire's eyes softened. He had bookshelves in every room of the house, even the bathroom. Mom used to complain she couldn't put a toothbrush down without finding it bookmarked in something the next day. Maya laughed, imagining a house overflowing with books. "That sounds like heaven to me. What kind of books did he like?" "Everything from classic literature to bizarre science fiction. But he had a special fondness for short stories, Raymond Carver, Flannery O'Connor, Jorge Luis Borges." Claire paused. "Actually, he wrote stories too. Nothing published, just for himself." "You mentioned that in your letter," Maya said. "Was he any good?" Claire nodded. "I think so, but I'm biased. He never tried to get published. Said he wrote for the joy of it, not for other people to read." The barista called out Claire's name and she excused herself to pick up the coffee she'd ordered at the counter. Maya watched her go, thinking how surreal it was to be sitting in her favorite cafe with the daughter of a man whose grave she'd visited on a whim. When Claire returned, she pulled a small leather-bound notebook from her bag. I brought something to show you. This is one of Dad's journals. He kept dozens of them, all filled with story ideas, observations, bits of overheard conversations. She handed the journal to Maya, who took it carefully. The leather was soft and worn, the pages yellowed at the edges. Are you sure you want me to see this? It seems personal. Dad was private about his writing while he was alive, but I think he'd like knowing someone else was reading his words now. Claire wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. Besides, you shared something personal with him first in a way. Maya gently opened the journal. The pages were filled with neat, compact handwriting. The same handwriting from Claire's letter, but smaller and more precise. She read a few lines from a random page. Old man at the grocery store today, studying avocados like they held the secrets of the universe. Too soft, he kept muttering. Not ready yet. Wondered if he was really talking about the avocados or something else entirely. Story idea, man who can tell the future by the ripeness of fruit? Maya smiled. He had a beautiful way of seeing the world. He did, Claire agreed. Even toward the end, when he was sick and couldn't leave the house much, he found stories everywhere. The way the mail carrier always skipped the third step on our porch. The pattern of birds landing on the feeder outside his window. What happened to him? Maya asked, then quickly added, I'm sorry if that's too personal. Claire shook her head. It's fine. He had Parkinson's, diagnosed about 8 years before he died. It progressed slowly at first, then more rapidly after Mom passed away. Almost like he'd been holding it at bay for her sake. She took a sip of her coffee. The last year was hard. I flew in when I could, but with my job and the distance. You did what you could, Maya said softly, recognizing the guilt in Claire's voice. I felt the same way with my mom. Always wondering if I should have done more, been there more. Exactly. Claire looked at her with understanding. It's the what-ifs that keep you up at night. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two strangers connected by the shared experience of loss. Maya carefully closed the journal. Thank you for showing me this. Actually, Claire said, pushing the journal back toward Maya when she tried to return it. I'd like you to borrow it if you want. I have several others and I've already read this one a few times. Really? Are you sure? Completely sure. Dad's words deserve to be read, and I think you'll appreciate them. Claire hesitated. There's something else I wanted to ask you about. I'm in town for another reason besides business. I've been trying to clear out Dad's house. It's finally sold after being on the market forever, and I need to finish sorting through his things before the new owners take possession next month. That must be difficult, Maya said. It is. I've put it off for years, if I'm being honest. But I've been going through his papers, and there are so many stories, journals, notes. I feel like they deserve better than being packed away in my garage. Claire leaned forward slightly. Would you, and please feel free to say no, would you be interested in helping me go through some of his writing? I could use a fresh perspective, especially from someone who loves books. Maya blinked in surprise. Me, but I never knew your father. Sometimes distance gives clarity. And there's something about the way you wrote about him in your letter. A stranger you'd never met. I think you might understand his work in a way others wouldn't. Claire smiled. Plus, you're a librarian. You must have some experience with organizing written materials. Maya thought about her empty apartment, the weekends that stretched out endlessly since her mother died. I'd like that, she said finally. When were you thinking? I'll be here through next weekend. Maybe tomorrow afternoon if you're free. The house is about 15 minutes from here in the old Oak Hill neighborhood. I know the area. My shift ends at noon tomorrow, so I could come by after that. They exchanged phone numbers and the address, finishing their drinks as the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Claire's publishing work in Colorado, Maya's favorite books, a local art exhibition they'd both been meaning to see. As they prepared to leave, Claire paused. I have to ask, why did you choose my father's grave that day? Out of all the graves in the cemetery, why his? Maya considered the question. I'm not sure, really. Something about it looking so plain and forgotten, or maybe it was just that shaft of sunlight hitting it right when I walked by. She shrugged. It felt like, I don't know, like I was supposed to stop there. Claire nodded slowly. Dad would have called that fate. He believed strongly that nothing was truly random, that every chance encounter had meaning if you paid attention. Outside the cafe, they said their goodbyes with a warmth that belied their brief acquaintance. Thank you again, Claire said. both for the letter and for agreeing to help with Dad's writings. Thank you for replying, Maya answered. I never expected anything to come from that letter. As she walked home, the leather journal tucked safely in her bag, Maya felt lighter somehow. The grief was still there, it always would be, but alongside it now was something new, a sense of curiosity and connection she hadn't felt in months. That night, she curled up in her reading chair and opened Thomas Winter's journal, entering the world of a man she'd never met, but whose words already felt like a conversation between friends. His observations made her laugh and think, seeing her town through different eyes. She read until midnight, finally falling asleep with the journal on her chest, her dreams full of stories waiting to be discovered. The house on Maple Street looked exactly as Maya had imagined it, a modest two-story brick home with ivy, climbing one wall and a wide front porch that sagged slightly in the middle. A huge oak tree dominated the front yard, its branches casting dappled shadows across the lawn. It was the kind of house that had character, that told stories without saying a word. Maya checked the address on her phone one more time before walking up the cracked concrete path to the front door. She'd spent the morning shelving books at the library, her mind constantly wandering to Thomas Winter's journal. She'd stayed up too late reading his observations and story fragments, fascinated by the way he described ordinary moments with extraordinary insight. Before she could knock, the door swung open. Claire stood there in jeans and an old flannel shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked different from yesterday, less polished, more approachable. You found it, Claire said, stepping back to let Maya in. Sorry about the mess. I've been sorting through things all morning. Maya stepped into a narrow hallway lined with empty bookshelves. No need to apologize. I'm here to help with the mess, remember? Right. Well, there's plenty of that. Claire led her through to a living room where cardboard boxes were stacked in wobbly towers. Some were labeled Kitchen, Donate, Claire's Childhood, while others remained unmarked, their contents a mystery. I brought your father's journal back, Maya said, pulling it from her bag. I stayed up late reading it. He had such a unique way of seeing things. Claire smiled, taking the journal. Did you have a favorite part? There was an entry about an old couple at the park feeding ducks. Your dad noticed how they never spoke to each other but always tore the bread into pieces of exactly the same size. He wrote that they'd been together so long they'd synchronized even the smallest gestures. Maya paused. It was such a small observation, but it said so much. That sounds like Dad. Claire placed the journal on a side table. Coffee? I brought a French press from my hotel since the kitchen is mostly packed up. I'd love some. Claire disappeared into another room, and Maya took the opportunity to look around. Despite the boxes and bare shelves, the house still felt lived in somehow. A worn armchair sat by the window, positioned perfectly to catch the afternoon light. Faded rectangles on the walls showed where pictures had once hung. A walking cane leaned in one corner untouched. Cream or sugar? Claire called from the kitchen. Just black is fine. Thanks. When Claire returned with 2 mugs, Maya was studying a small collection of rocks displayed on the mantelpiece. Dad's treasures, Claire explained, handing Maya a mug. He collected interesting rocks his whole life. Said they were the Earth's oldest storytellers. Maya picked up a smooth striped stone. They're beautiful. Keep it, Claire said. Dad would like knowing his collection was being appreciated by someone new. Maya hesitated, then slipped the stone into her pocket. Thank you. Claire gestured toward a hallway off the living room. His study is back here. That's where most of the writing is. I've barely scratched the surface. She led Maya to a small room at the back of the house. Unlike the rest of the home, this space remained largely untouched. A desk stood under the window, piled high with papers. Bookshelves lined every wall, stuffed to overflowing with books, journals, and manila folders. A typewriter sat in the corner, covered with a cloth. Wow, Maya breathed. It's like stepping into his mind, I know. I couldn't bring myself to pack any of this up yet. Claire moved a stack of papers from a chair, offering Maya a place to sit. I'm not even sure where to start. There's so much and I don't know what's worth keeping or what should just... She trailed off, her hand hovering over a pile of notebooks. Nothing gets thrown away until we look at it, Maya said firmly, librarian mode kicking in. Let's make some categories. Published work, unpublished but complete stories, fragments and ideas, personal journals. Then we can decide what to do with each category. Claire nodded, looking relieved to have a plan. That sounds perfect. Thank you. They worked steadily through the afternoon, creating piles on the floor, occasionally reading passages aloud to each other. Maya was struck by how many complete stories Thomas had written without ever trying to publish them. Dozens of carefully typed manuscripts that had never seen the light of day. Listen to this opening, Maya said, reading from a typed page. The first time Ellie saw a ghost, she was hanging laundry in the backyard. The white sheet snapped in the wind, and on the other side stood a man in a bowler hat, watching her with patient eyes. She wasn't afraid, only curious about what had brought him to her clothesline on a Tuesday afternoon. That's the visitor, Claire said. One of his ghost stories. He had a whole series of them, gentle ghost stories, he called them. Not scary, just encounters between the living and the dead that changed both in some small way. I'd read a book of those, Maya said. They should be published, Claire sighed. I've thought about it, especially since I work in publishing. But it feels presumptuous somehow, making that decision for him when he chose not to publish during his lifetime. Maybe he was just waiting for the right time, Maya suggested, or the right person to help him. They continued sorting, the piles growing as the afternoon light shifted across the room. Maya found herself drawn to a series of journals from the 1980s, fascinated by Thomas's observations from before she was born. Your dad was teaching at the community college back then? She asked, reading an entry about his freshman composition class. Yes, for about 15 years. He loved it, but the Parkinson's eventually made it too difficult. Claire was flipping through a photo album she'd found at the bottom of a box. Here he is with his students. She handed Maya a faded color photograph of a younger Thomas, tall and lean with a beard and kind eyes, standing with a group of students outside a brick building. Creative Writing, Spring 1988, was written on the back. Maya studied the faces in the photo, young men and women in 80s fashion, smiling at the camera. Then her heart stopped. In the front row, with curly hair and oversized glasses, stood a woman Maya would recognize anywhere. She'd seen that face every day in her mirror growing up, in old photo albums, in her dreams since the funeral. That's my mother, she whispered, her finger trembling as she pointed to the young woman. That's my mom. Claire leaned closer, her coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips. What, are you sure? Positive. Lisa Chen. That's her maiden name before she married my dad. Maya couldn't tear her eyes from the photo. She never told me she took creative writing. She was studying nursing back then. Claire took the photo, turning it over to check the date again. That's incredible. Your mom was one of Dad's students? Maya nodded, her mind racing. She would have been about 20 here. She met my dad a year later. She looked up at Claire. Do you think he might have kept any of her writing? If she was his student, probably. Dad kept everything. Claire gestured to the organized chaos around them. It would be in one of the student folders. I'm guessing. They searched with renewed purpose, pulling out boxes labeled teaching and student work. Finally, in a folder marked Promising Writers, 1980s, they found it, a stapled packet with The Jade Bracelet by Lisa Chen typed on the cover page. Maya's hands shook as she opened it. This is her handwriting, she said, pointing to the notes in the margin. I can't believe this. Read it, Claire urged gently. Maya began reading aloud, her voice catching on the familiar cadence she recognized from the bedtime stories her mother had told her. The story was about a young Chinese-American girl who inherits a jade bracelet from her grandmother, only to lose it at school. The girl spends the story searching for the bracelet, only to realize at the end that its true value was in the memories it carried, not the jade itself. This is the story she used to tell me when I was little, Maya said, tears welling in her eyes. I thought she made it up for me, but she wrote it years before I was born. Claire was quiet for a moment. Dad wrote comments at the end, she said, pointing to a paragraph in red ink. Maya read the neat handwriting. Lisa, this story has the ring of truth that makes fiction powerful. The details of the grandmother's hands, the weight of the jade. These make the loss real to the reader. Consider developing this into a longer piece. You have a natural gift for storytelling that shouldn't be wasted. Sometimes our most important stories are the ones we think no one else will care about. Tears spilled down Maya's cheeks. She never told me any of this. Never mentioned your father or this class. Maybe it was just a brief part of her life, Claire suggested, An elective she took that didn't connect to her main studies. No, this meant something to her. Maya wiped her eyes. The jade bracelet in this story, she gave it to me on my 16th birthday. Said it came from my grandmother. I still have it at home in my jewelry box. Claire's eyes widened. So the story was true? At least partly. And she kept telling it, passing it on. Maya looked around the room, seeing it with new eyes. Your father encouraged her to write, to value her stories. That's something she always taught me. That stories matter. That they connect us across time. They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the words of two people they'd loved and lost. Two people who, it turned out, had briefly known each other decades ago. I don't believe in coincidences, Claire said finally. Dad always said the universe has patterns we just can't see clearly. Like leaving a letter at a random grave and finding a connection to my mother? Maya smiled through her tears. That's quite a pattern. The light was fading outside, shadows lengthening across the floor of Thomas Winters's study. But inside, Maya felt a new kind of light growing. The illumination that comes from finding a missing piece of yourself in an unexpected place. We should celebrate this, Claire said, standing up. There's a bottle of Dad's favorite whiskey in the kitchen. He'd definitely think this calls for a toast. As Claire went to fetch the bottle, Maya carefully placed her mother's story on the desk, next to Thomas's journal. Two writers whose paths had crossed briefly, whose words had outlived them, whose connection had somehow led their daughters to this moment. Thanks, Mom, she whispered. And thank you, Mr. Winters. I think I understand now why your grave caught my eye that morning. When Claire returned with 2 glasses and a dusty bottle, Maya was ready with a suggestion. I think we should publish your dad's ghost stories, she said, and I'd like to help. 1 year later, the bookstore was more crowded than Maya had expected. She stood near the back, watching as people filled every available chair and spilled into the aisles between bookshelves. The owner kept bringing out more folding chairs from the storage room, apologizing as she squeezed them into impossible spaces. We've never had this kind of turnout for a local author event, the owner whispered to Maya as she passed. Your friend must have good connections, Maya smiled. She works in publishing. At the front of the store, a table displayed stacks of books with a hauntingly beautiful cover, a white sheet hanging on a clothesline, a shadowy figure barely visible behind it. Gentle Hauntings, the collected stories of Thomas Winters, was printed in elegant script across the top. Claire stood nearby, talking with the store's events coordinator. She caught Maya's eye and gave a small wave, her face a mixture of excitement and nerves. Maya nodded encouragingly. They had worked toward this moment for months, and now it was finally happening. The past year had transformed both their lives in ways neither could have predicted that morning in the cemetery. After discovering the connection between Thomas and Maya's mother, they had thrown themselves into the project of bringing his stories to the world. Claire had leveraged her publishing connections, while Maya spent countless evenings and weekends organizing, editing, and sometimes typing manuscripts that had existed only as handwritten drafts. They had worked mostly long distance, Claire in Colorado, Maya still in town, but they had become close friends despite the distance, bonded by their shared mission and the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. We should start soon, Claire said, approaching Maya with 2 cups of water. Are you ready for your part? Maya took a deep breath. As ready as I'll ever be. The events coordinator tapped the microphone and the crowd quieted. Welcome, everyone, to the launch of Gentle Hauntings. We're thrilled to have Claire Winters here to tell us about her father's work, along with Maya Chen, who helped bring these stories to light. But first, Claire would like to say a few words. Claire stepped up to the podium, looking elegant in a simple blue dress. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. Thank you all for coming tonight. My father, Thomas Winters, wrote stories his entire life, but until now they've never been shared beyond a very small circle. He was a private person who found joy in the act of creation itself, not in recognition. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. I often wondered why he never pursued publication, but I think he was waiting for the right moment even if he didn't know it himself. She glanced at Maya before continuing. Many of you have asked how this book came to be, and it's a story that my father, with his love of unexpected connections, would have appreciated. Claire told the story. How Maya had left a letter at a stranger's grave, how Claire had found it and replied, how they discovered that Maya's mother had been Thomas's student decades earlier. She spoke about the year they'd spent piecing together his manuscript, discovering stories tucked away in drawers and filing cabinets, typed on an old manual typewriter or scrawled in notebooks. The title story, Gentle Hauntings, it was inspired by my father's belief that we are all haunted in some way, not by frightening specters, but by memories, missed chances, words left unsaid. His ghosts aren't menacing. They're messengers trying to help the living resolve what remains unfinished. Maya listened, remembering the first time she'd read that story, sitting cross-legged on Thomas's study floor, surrounded by his words, feeling as if he were somehow present in the room, guiding their discovery. But I think Maya can explain the heart of these stories better than I can, Claire said, gesturing toward the back of the room. She's written a beautiful introduction to the collection, which you'll find in your copies. Maya, would you mind reading a bit of it for everyone? Maya hadn't expected this. They had agreed she would say a few words, but reading aloud? Her heart raced as she made her way to the front, clutching her copy of the book. The crowd's eyes followed her, curious about this stranger who had helped bring Thomas Winter's words to life. At the podium, Maya opened to the introduction she had written over several late nights, trying to capture what Thomas's stories had come to mean to her. She cleared her throat and began to read. I never met Thomas Winters in life. Our connection began in death, with a letter left at his grave, an impulsive act born of my own grief. What followed was a series of coincidences so precisely aligned that they challenged the very concept of chance. Maya looked up briefly, then continued. Thomas Winters wrote about the thin spaces between worlds, the moments when what we think we know gives way to something larger and more mysterious. His stories suggest that separation, between the living and the dead, between strangers, between past and present, is more permeable than we imagine. She turned the page. I discovered while working on this collection that my own mother had once been Thomas's student, that he had encouraged her storytelling, which she later passed on to me. This revelation might seem simply coincidental, but after immersing myself in Thomas's world for a year, I've come to share his belief that there are patterns at work beyond our understanding. The room was completely silent now, everyone leaning forward slightly, caught up in the story behind the stories. In the title piece, Gentle Hauntings, Thomas wrote, we think of ghosts as remnants of tragedy. But what if they are instead ambassadors of connection? What if they linger not because they cannot let go, but because we have not yet received their message? In many ways, Thomas himself became such an ambassador, connecting his daughter and me across time and circumstance, delivering a message about the power of words to outlive us. Maya closed the book. I believe Thomas wrote these stories knowing that someday they would find their readers, just as my letter somehow found its way to his daughter. I'm grateful to have played a small part in fulfilling that unspoken promise. The applause caught Maya by surprise, warm and enthusiastic, filling the small bookstore. She returned to her seat as Claire took questions from the audience about her father, the stories, the process of bringing them to publication. Later, during the book signing, Maya stood to the side, watching as Claire inscribed copy after copy. They had agreed that Claire should be the one to sign. She was Thomas's daughter, after all. But people kept coming up to Maya too, wanting to talk about the introduction, asking about her connection to the stories. An older woman with silver hair approached, clutching her book to her chest. I just wanted to say I knew Tom Thomas years ago when we taught together at the community college. He was a wonderful teacher, so encouraging to his students. She looked down at the book in her hands. I always told him he should publish his stories. He would say, when the time is right, Judy, when the time is right. I guess he was waiting for you to. Maya smiled, touched by this glimpse of Thomas from someone who had known him. Thank you for telling me that. It means a lot to hear from his friends. When the last book had been signed and the store began to empty, Claire joined Maya near the refreshment table. Well, we did it, she said, her voice tired but happy. Dad's stories are out in the world. They are, Maya agreed, and people seem to love them. The publisher already mentioned a second printing, can you believe it? Claire shook her head in wonder. From a letter on a grave to this. It's like one of Dad's stories. It really is. After helping clean up, they walked together to the cemetery. It was late evening now, the spring air cool and fragrant with blooming trees. They had developed a tradition of visiting Thomas's grave together whenever Claire came to town, bringing him updates on their progress. The cemetery looked different to Maya now, not just a place of ending but a place of unexpected beginnings. They made their way to Thomas's grave, which was no longer neglected. Fresh flowers brightened the once plain stone, and a small bench had been installed nearby, donated by the local library after Maya had approached them about hosting a reading series in Thomas's name. Claire placed a copy of the book against the headstone. "We did it, Dad," she said softly. "Your stories found their readers." Maya added the small, smooth stone she'd been carrying in her pocket, one she'd picked up on the beach during a weekend trip with Claire to the coast. They had started a collection of them in Thomas's study, which Claire had decided to keep intact when she moved back to town to oversee the local branch of her publishing company. "I brought something else too," Maya said, pulling an envelope from her bag. "My mom's jade bracelet story. The publisher wants to include it in an anthology of new voices they're putting together. I thought he should know." She tucked the envelope beside the book, remembering that first letter she'd left here over a year ago. So much had changed since then. Her grief had softened into something gentler. Her lonely life had expanded to include not just Claire but a community of writers and readers she'd met through their project. The sun was setting behind the trees, casting long shadows across the cemetery. In the golden light, Maya could almost imagine Thomas watching them with approval, perhaps jotting notes for a story about two women brought together by loss who found purpose in preserving what might have been forgotten. "Ready?" Claire asked, linking her arm through Maya's. "The others will be waiting for us." A group of local writers was gathering at the bean counter for an informal celebration. People who had known Thomas, others who had just discovered his work, and a few of Maya's colleagues from the library who had supported the project from the beginning. "Ready?" Maya said, giving the grave a final glance. "Thank you," she whispered too softly for Claire to hear. As they walked arm in arm through the iron gates, Maya thought about the invisible threads that Thomas had written about, the connections that bind strangers together, that stretch across time, that turn chance into purpose. She had left a letter on a stranger's tomb, never expecting an answer. What happened next had indeed left her speechless, but now, surrounded by stories waiting to be told, she had found her voice again.